I still remember the sting of that Christmas night, the laughter, the clinking glasses, and my mother-in-law's voice cutting through it all like a knife. She called me useless, a burden, a woman who had nothing to offer her son. Everyone laughed along as if I were the punchline of a cruel joke. I didn't argue. I didn't fight back. I simply lowered my gaze and smiled, storing her words deep inside. Because what no one at that table knew was that I had been keeping a secret, one powerful enough to turn their mockery into silence. The dining room glowed with the kind of warmth that belonged on a holiday postcard. Golden lights wrapped the massive tree in the corner. The table was dressed in red and gold, and laughter filled every corner. To anyone peering in from the frosted windows, it would look like the perfect American Christmas. For me, it was a stage, and I was the prop nobody wanted to claim. I sat between my husband and his sister, both of them engaged in cheerful chatter that had nothing to do with me. Every smile, every toast, every remark from my in-laws carried an undertone sharp enough to slice. I kept my lips curved upward, my body still, though inside I felt the pressure of being the only outsider at a table full of insiders. My mother-in-law, regal in her emerald dress, raised her glass. "To family," she said, her voice carrying authority. Then, without missing a beat, she turned to me. "And perhaps, Emma, by next Christmas you'll finally contribute something to it." The words dropped like a stone into silence. Some chuckled politely, others exchanged knowing glances. My cheeks burned, but I tilted my head as though amused. I lifted my glass, its rim catching the chandelier's sparkle, and let the moment hang. My dress was crimson, a flame against their polished coolness. Yet under the table, my hand clenched the stem until it cut into my skin. A sting spread across my palm, and I felt a bead of warmth that was not wine. No one noticed, or perhaps no one cared. They were too busy relishing the performance. The evening dragged on in a haze of carols, desserts, and subtle jabs. Each comment about work, status, or property was angled toward me, a reminder that I supposedly brought nothing but my presence. I didn't argue. I offered smiles, small nods, and a steady calm that masked the storm. Their laughter was louder than truth, and I let it be. When it was over, I helped clear plates, ignored the glances, kissed cheeks goodbye. The cold air outside was sharper than their words, and yet somehow less cruel. My husband talked of traffic and football on the drive home, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the cuts his family left. I leaned back, my silence deeper than his chatter. Later, in the dim light of our bedroom, I slipped out of the red dress and into silence. My laptop waited on the desk, glowing faintly. I opened it with steady fingers, my bloodied palm now bandaged. A new email sat at the top of my inbox, its subject line bold, cover feature, January issue. The message unfolded before me. A journalist confirming the interview, a photograph approved, the headline already chosen. The woman behind the $1 billion code. My throat tightened, not from sorrow, but from the weight of timing. Days from now, the same family that laughed at me tonight would be staring at my face on a magazine they could not ignore. I scrolled through the attachments, draft layouts of the spread, numbers charting my company's growth, details of the feature. The double life I had maintained for years was about to collide. By day, to them, I was the silent wife. Behind closed doors, I was the architect of a tech empire that had quietly surpassed everything they worshipped. The house was quiet except for the hum of the heater. My husband lay snoring, unaware. I closed the laptop softly as if sealing a secret, though my pulse thundered with its power. On the nightstand, my phone buzzed. I reached for it, and there it was, a notification glowing in the dark. "Forbes just tagged you." The words seemed to pierce the silence, louder than the mocking laughter that still echoed in my head. My reflection stared back from the black screen, tired eyes, a faint trace of crimson on my lips, and beneath it all, a flame that no ridicule could extinguish. They thought, They had won tonight. They had no idea the game had only just begun. The morning after Christmas was colder, sharper, as if the air itself carried the residue of last night's humiliation. My phone lit up with notifications, and before I even unlocked the screen, I knew where they came from. The family group chat, Facebook, of course, where my mother-in-law held court like a self-proclaimed queen. Such a shame, her latest post read beneath a photo of our family gathered at the table. Some women marry in but never lift a finger. Blessings only fall on those who work hard. The likes and laughing emojis piled on from cousins, aunts, distant relatives who had all smiled to my face last night. I stared at the words, a familiar ache pressing against my chest. Then I placed the phone down, face first, and opened my laptop. On the screen, a different world awaited. Contracts lined up neatly, digital signatures pending. Across the globe, an investment fund worth hundreds of millions was waiting for my confirmation. I clicked, reviewed, and signed. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the heater and the final ping of completion. The ink on their mockery was still drying online, while my empire grew quietly in the background. I was the invisible architect of their future shame. I typed into the family group chat window, "Actually, I do contribute more than you think." My finger hovered over the send button, then I deleted it. The words felt too small for the storm that was coming. Instead, I wrote to myself in a note, "If they knew the truth," and closed the window. Hours passed. My husband scrolled through sports scores, oblivious while I negotiated with attorneys in Zurich and developers in Singapore. The world I commanded was vast and invisible, a hidden kingdom they couldn't touch. Every deal secured was another weapon stored quietly in my arsenal. By evening, the announcement came. The valuation of my company had officially crossed the billion-dollar mark. A unicorn, though I'd never cared for the fairy tale term. To me, it was armor, proof, a shield against every insult ever thrown my way. I should have celebrated, but instead I sat still, watching the numbers climb on the screen, thinking about how the same people mocking me online would choke on their laughter once the story broke. It wasn't revenge I wanted, it was silence, the kind that follows when truth is undeniable. The twist came sooner than I had planned. While I was reviewing our next quarter's roadmap, I heard a notification ping on my husband's phone across the table, then another, and another. Curious, I reached for mine. The headline blazed across my feed, "The woman behind a billion-dollar startup, Emma Parker's unseen empire." My breath caught. They hadn't waited for the January cover. The article had leaked early, accompanied by photos, charts, and interviews I'd done months ago. My face was suddenly everywhere: LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, a secret no longer. And then, as if fate had a cruel sense of humor, I opened Facebook. There she was, my mother-in-law live streaming from her kitchen, smiling as she showed off the leftovers from last night's dinner. "Family is everything," she was saying, her hands arranging plates of ham and pie. But below the stream, comments began to shift. At first, the usual praise, then tags, dozens, hundreds. "Isn't this your daughter-in-law?" one wrote, linking the Forbes article. Another added laughing emojis. "Guess she contributes more than you thought." The stream's tone faltered as her phone buzzed with alerts. She tried to continue, her smile stiffening, but the comments poured in faster. "Wow, billionaire in the family and you called her lazy? How does it feel being the butt of your own joke?" I sat back, watching, not out of cruelty but inevitability. This was the moment I had envisioned but never orchestrated. The truth revealed itself, and the audience delivered the justice I never spoke aloud. Within minutes, the live stream ended abruptly. The screen went dark, but the comments lived on, multiplying screenshot by screenshot shared across feeds. I placed my phone down, my pulse steady. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to defend myself. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken louder than I ever could. Somewhere across town, in a kitchen gone silent, my mother-in-law was discovering that the woman she had ridiculed was no one's burden, no one's parasite. She was a storm in disguise, and now the storm had broken free. For years, I let them believe I was small. My husband would leave for work each morning, kissing my cheek as if he were the provider of our world. He never questioned where I went once the door shut. When I told him I worked part-time, handling simple projects, he nodded with mild amusement, as if indulging a child's hobby. He never asked more, and I never volunteered. That silence was my sanctuary. Behind that veil, I built an empire brick by brick. Days that seemed idle to him were spent in boardrooms, on flights, in code-filled war rooms where my name was whispered with respect and fear. I wore plain clothes to family dinners, drove an average car, declined designer gifts, all to preserve the illusion of modesty. It was not cowardice. It was a test. I wanted to know if my worth to them was measured by wealth or by presence. I had my answer long ago, but I played the part anyway. I let the sneers pile up, the jokes sharpen, the label of useless wife carve deeper. Because the longer they believed, the greater the reveal would become. When the article dropped, my husband's silence was louder than anything he'd said before. He sat across the table, phone in hand, scrolling, his jaw tightening with each headline. Emma Parker, the billion-dollar brain behind tech's biggest unicorn. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask. Instead, he stood, left the room, and closed the door. That night, I checked my email before bed. Among the flood of congratulations and interview requests was a name I recognized too well, our family lawyer. The subject line froze me, Property Division Inquiry. I clicked, pulse hammering. The message was short, professional, cold. At Mr. Parker's request, we are preparing documents to separate joint marital assets. Please review the preliminary terms. I leaned back, the screen glowing against the darkness of the room. So that was his move. Not a confrontation, not a question, not even a scream of betrayal, just paperwork. As if erasing me from his ledger would restore the balance of power. The next morning, the air in the house was heavy. He avoided my gaze, speaking only of routine things. Coffee, errands, weather. His smile was brittle, his hand movements restless. He was planning something, and I let him think I didn't notice. By evening, the trap was sprung. A message pinged on my phone, screenshots circulating on Twitter, images of me, blurry, inappropriate, paired with captions that screamed hypocrisy. The posts claimed I was unfaithful, immoral, unworthy of the title billionaire role model. At first glance, they could fool anyone. The woman in those pictures looked like me. The eyes, the lips, the curve of the jaw. But they were fabrications, deep fakes. I stared at them, not with fear, but with recognition. This was his weapon. He couldn't compete with my empire, so he tried to dismantle my image. But the world had changed. The more people tried to destroy women with lies, the more those women rose higher. Within hours, hashtags surged. Stand with Emma, some deep fake justice. Survivors of similar digital assaults rallied, voices joining mine in unison. What was meant to shame me became a movement. Talk shows debated my case. Feminist groups hailed me as a symbol of resilience. My inbox overflowed with messages from strangers, thanking me for not hiding. The scandal designed to ruin me became the stage on which I stood taller than ever. My husband watched silently, his plan backfiring in real time. The man who once carried himself as the perfect husband now looked cornered, exposed. His mask cracked each time he opened his phone and saw the world defending me, not him. For years, he was the golden boy of his family, the man who could do no wrong. But in the glare of this new truth, he wasn't protector, provider, or partner. He was the enemy. I caught him staring at me once, his expression a mix of rage and desperation. For the first time, I realized he wasn't just threatened by my wealth. He was terrified of my independence. He wanted control, and he had lost it. Late one night, as I sat reviewing offers from networks wanting me to speak on their shows, my phone rang. The number was blocked. I hesitated, then answered. Emma Parker? The voice was calm, steady, male. We know everything. About him, about the videos, about what comes next. The line went silent before I could respond. My reflection stared back at me from the black screen, fractured and unfamiliar. It was no longer just a marriage unraveling. It was a war. The studio lights were blinding, brighter than anything I had felt in months. They washed over me, erasing shadows, demanding honesty. I sat tall, dressed not in luxury but in simplicity. A navy blouse, a silver pendant around my neck, hair pulled back. I didn't come to flaunt wealth. I came to tell the truth. When the cameras rolled, I took a breath and let silence linger for a moment. Last Christmas, I began. I sat at a table with my husband's family. I was told I was useless, that I had nothing to offer, and I believed for a moment that silence was strength. But silence only feeds cruelty. Tonight I'm breaking it. The host leaned back, giving me space. So why now, Emma? Why speak out? I folded my hands. Because my story is not just mine. It belongs to every woman who has been dismissed, shamed, ridiculed by families, by workplaces, by society. I am no longer just Emma Parker. I am a voice in a chorus that refuses to stay quiet. The hashtag rose almost instantly. Janni rise from ashes. Tweets, posts, shares. Screens across the world lit up with the phrase, the more I spoke, the more people joined. I recounted the humiliation, the ridicule, the way my pain had been laughed at. And then I told the other half. The billion-dollar empire built in silence, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. A screen behind me displayed images. The Christmas dinner table, me in my red dress, eyes lowered, a single tear in the corner of my eye. Next to it, the camera caught me now, poised, unflinching, unafraid. The contrast was striking, a rebirth painted in real time, a phoenix rising. In living rooms across the city, families watched. In one of them, I imagined my mother-in-law clutching the remote, her face paling. Perhaps she remembered her words. Perhaps she replayed her own laughter. I would never know for certain, but somewhere in the shadows of her home, I knew she saw me reclaiming my voice, claiming. The broadcast ended with applause, not just from the studio audience, but from millions watching online. I stepped off the stage into a tide of messages, calls, and tags. The movement had already begun, and it was bigger than me. Meanwhile, the fallout was swift. Brands once eager to align with my husband's family now released statements distancing themselves. Quoted endorsements vanished from websites. Invitations dried up. The charities my mother-in-law paraded through society politely declined her name on their lists. The empire she once claimed as hers began to crumble, stone by stone. News anchors replayed her past remarks, pairing them with the viral clips of me speaking. Commentators tore into the hypocrisy, the arrogance, the cruelty. My silence had protected them once, but my voice was now dismantling the illusion they'd crafted. I stayed quiet online, letting the current move without interference. I didn't need to answer, didn't need to clap back. The public was already holding court, and justice was louder than any response I could write. Then came the twist. One morning, as I scrolled through updates, I saw her, my mother-in-law, on video. Her hair was unkempt, her tone subdued. "I want to apologize," she said, voice quivering. "I was wrong. Emma, she is remarkable, and I was blind to it." It spread quickly, shared by thousands. But the comments beneath were merciless. Too late. Convenient timing. "You mocked her until the world found out she was richer than you." The apology was drowned by cynicism. I watched the video twice, then closed it. I felt nothing. No vindication, no triumph, not even anger. Just stillness. I refused to speak, to react. The silence this time was mine, and it was deliberate. I let the world decide, and they had. For a moment, it seemed the storm was passing. My company thrived, my message echoed, and the shadows of their power faded. But power never disappears, it shifts. That night, as I prepared for another interview, my inbox pinged with a new message. The sender's address was hidden, the subject line simple: "Truth you haven't seen." I clicked. The body of the email was a single line: "Someone else orchestrated this. Your husband was only a pawn." Attached was a file, encrypted, labeled Project Ashes. I stared at it, my chest tightening. For months, I had thought the battle was between me, my husband, and his mother. But if this message was true, the web stretched further, darker, and someone had been pulling strings I hadn't even seen. The phoenix had risen, yes, but the fire was far from over. Success, I learned, was lonelier than failure. In the weeks that followed my public rebirth, invitations poured in, not from those who had once ridiculed me, but from strangers eager to share in my glow. Old friends resurfaced with bright smiles and open hands calling me sister, as if affection had always been currency between us. Messages flooded my inbox, not of congratulations, but of requests, investments, donations, introductions. Every hand was outstretched. Every smile carried weight. I had once believed wealth would buy freedom. Instead, it bought chains, softer, shinier, but chains all the same. I sat in meetings surrounded by people who praised me, yet calculated behind their eyes what they could take. The truth was no different in private circles. Relatives who had mocked me now left voicemails dripping with honeyed tones, pretending history could be rewritten. "Emma, you've always inspired us," one cousin crooned. Another asked if I might consider funding her new boutique. At night, I returned to the quiet of my home, a house that felt more cavern than sanctuary. The rooms echoed with silence, reminding me of what power had cost. My husband no longer spoke to me except through lawyers. My mother-in-law had vanished from public life, retreating into shadows of her own disgrace. What had I really gained? One evening, I stood before the mirror, brushing my hair back. The woman who stared at me was no longer the same girl in the crimson dress holding back tears. Her eyes were sharp, her shoulders squared, her jaw set in quiet defiance. But beneath the steel was a whisper of doubt. I leaned closer to the glass. "Is the woman in the mirror still me?" I whispered. The question hung heavy in the air. My reflection offered no answer. Days later, the answer revealed itself, but not in the way I expected. It began with another message, this one not anonymous, not hidden. A file delivered to my legal team contained damning evidence, forged documents, fabricated images, and a network of manipulations that had nearly toppled me months before. But the source of the rot was not my husband. He was a pawn, just as the mysterious hacker had warned. The mastermind was his sister. My sister-in-law, always silent at family dinners, always the observer in the corner. She had worn politeness like a mask, letting her mother's cruelty and her brother's arrogance shield her true ambitions. But the evidence showed otherwise. She'd engineered the deep-fake scandal, planted false rumors, and whispered poison into her mother's ear. She was the architect of my public crucifixion, not the bumbling man I once called my partner. When I confronted the files, I felt a sting deeper than betrayal. To be betrayed by a spouse was one wound. To be dismantled by another woman, one who knew exactly how society broke us, was another kind of cruelty. The revelation leaked faster than I anticipated. Reporters sniffed out the truth, digging through financial records, IP addresses, hidden accounts. The story broke like wildfire. Emma Parker's sister-in-law behind coordinated smear campaign. Public outrage was swift, but it did not soothe me. Instead, it hollowed me. For so long, I had fought visible enemies, my husband, my mother-in-law, but this was different. This was betrayal with surgical precision, planned by someone who had never once raised her voice in anger. The night the article went live, I sat alone in my office staring at the city lights. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Emma. The voice was smooth, chillingly familiar. Now you know. It was her. You think this empire is yours? She continued. You think money and fame make you untouchable? You're wrong. You're standing on foundations I can break with a single move. I gripped the phone, steadying my breath. Why? Her laugh was low, sharp. Because it should have been me. I'm the one worthy of carrying this family's legacy, not you. You married in, Emma. I was born for it. The line went dead, leaving only the echo of her final words. I am the rightful heir. In the dark, I realized the war was far from over. What I had believed was victory was merely another layer of the game, and my enemy was no longer the man who betrayed me. It was the woman who had hidden in plain sight all along. I had weapons sharper than scandal, tools stronger than revenge. For weeks I stayed quiet, ignoring the noise, the interviews, the demands that I respond to my sister-in-law's betrayal. Silence became my shield. But behind that silence, I was building something she could never touch. On a Monday morning, as the markets opened, I revealed it to the world. A blockchain-based transparency platform. Every contract I had signed, every share I owned, every investment I had built, it was all recorded immutably, unalterable, visible to anyone who cared to look. No smear campaign, no forged paper, no whispered lie could undo what was carved into digital stone. The announcement broke the internet. Emma Parker reinvents wealth. Transparency revolution. The billionaire who changed the rules. Overnight, the game was no longer about who could manipulate the loudest. It was about proof, trust, and permanence. Critics who once called me a fraud stumbled in the face of undeniable records. Investors flocked, not out of greed, but respect. Even my enemies were forced into silence. The evidence was too clear, the foundation too strong. I watched the headlines scroll by. She's rewriting the playbook for the ultra-rich. Emma Parker, the woman who broke the game. And beneath each one, I felt the weight of irony. For so long, they had tried to erase me. Now I was the one erasing the very stage they performed on. But power no longer tasted the way it once did. The loneliness of victory lingered, the echo of betrayal still fresh. My husband was gone, my marriage a hollow shell. My mother-in-law hid from the world, shamed into obscurity. My sister-in-law hissed from the shadows, still plotting, still claiming rights to an empire she had never built. I had won the battle, but the scars of it etched themselves into me. So I made a choice. Not to keep fighting the same war, not to keep proving myself to people who would never see me. Instead, I would create something they could not taint, a new order not built on bloodlines or grudges, but on legacy. I stood before an audience of thousands in a hall lit with gold. Cameras flashed, banners waved, and the words, "Rise from ashes," stretched across the stage behind me. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the immensity of what was about to begin. This, I said into the microphone, is not about wealth. It's about transformation. For every woman who has been told she is less, for every daughter-in-law silenced at dinner tables, for every girl whose voice was dismissed, I stand here for you, and I will not stand alone. The crowd erupted, chanting, clapping, voices rising as one. I announced the creation of a global foundation, funded not by charity, but by structure, investments, scholarships, programs designed to shatter cycles of silence. The applause rolled like thunder. In the front row, I saw women wiping tears, clutching hands, whispering to one another. Their faces reflected something I had once craved in my darkest hours: recognition, validation, hope. The stage lights were warm, wrapping me in a glow so different from the cold glare of that Christmas dinner. I remembered the red dress, The cruel laughter, the way I had once felt like nothing more than a shadow at someone else's table. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone reborn. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the audience wash over me. When I opened them, I saw not just the crowd in the hall, but millions watching worldwide, streaming, sharing, shouting. Rise from Ashes was no longer a hashtag. It was a movement. And somewhere, in the silence of their homes, I knew my husband, his mother, and his sister were watching too. Watching me ascend a stage they could never touch. Watching the woman they mocked become untouchable. I ended the speech with a smile, my voice steady. And to think, it all began with a Christmas dinner. The hall roared, the chant echoing, "Rise from ashes, rise from ashes." For the first time in years, I felt no doubt, only clarity. The game was over. I had broken it. And in its place, I had written a new story, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been told they were nothing.